When the rain fell, so did we. Chapter 1. The sound of rain on the window. The rain had been falling for 3 days without pause, not in storms or fits of thunder, just a steady, soft curtain of water that blurred the edges of the small village of Montvini, a place where time seemed to move slower than anywhere else. The cobblestones glistened like warm glass. The narrow streets smelled of wet leaves and old stone. Inside the cafe on the corner, the one with the fogged windows and the chipped sign that read Café du Pont, a man sat alone, stirring a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His name was André Valois, though most of the villagers simply called him Monsieur André. He was in his late 40s, tall but stooped slightly from years of leaning over his easel. A painter once, though not much of one anymore. He had lived in Montvini for nearly 20 years now, ever since he'd left the city and all that came with it: noise, ambition, heartbreak. Here, the only sound that mattered was rain on the window and the faint clink of porcelain in the cafe. And yet, this morning, something different stirred in him, a small restlessness, like an echo he couldn't place. At precisely 10 o'clock, the cafe door opened, and the bell above it chimed softly. André looked up. She stepped in out of the rain with her umbrella half collapsed, her coat darkened by water, and her hair still that same deep chestnut framed her face in damp waves. It had been 15 years, but he knew her instantly. Claire Duval. She looked older, of course, but so did he. There were lines now at the corners of her mouth, the faint weariness of someone who had seen both love and loss, but her eyes, those stayed the same, clear, steady, quietly curious. She saw him before she even ordered her coffee. Their eyes met through the steam of the espresso machine. Neither of them smiled right away. The years between them hung in the space like fog. Then, slowly, she crossed the room. "André," she said, in the soft voice he remembered far too well. Claire. The sound of her name in his mouth felt foreign and familiar all at once. They sat together by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "I didn't think you still lived here," she said, cupping her hands around her mug. "I didn't think you'd come back," he replied. "After Paris, I assumed." She laughed lightly, but it wasn't really a laugh. Paris was never home. It was just somewhere to disappear. "And did you?" Her eyes flickered toward him. For a while, he didn't press further. That had always been the rhythm between them. What wasn't said was as loud as what was. They spoke for a long time, the kind of slow, meandering talk that doesn't rush anywhere, about small things. How the bakery still burned the crusts on Tuesdays. How the bridge over the river had finally been repaired. How the painter on Rue des Fleurs himself had supposedly retired. When the silence came again, it wasn't awkward. It was heavy with the comfort of what used to be. "Do you still paint?" she asked eventually. He hesitated. "Sometimes, mostly the sea, or the rain, still trying to catch what won't stay still." He smiled faintly. "Some things never change." She nodded, her eyes on the glass. "And some do." Outside, the rain fell harder for a moment, tapping against the window like 1,000 tiny questions. After a while, she said, "Do you remember that summer when the river flooded? When we climbed the bell tower to watch the water rise?" "How could I forget?" he said. "You wore my coat, and it was twice your size. And you dropped your sketchbook into the water." "I did." He chuckled quietly. "You told me it was a sign to stop drawing and start living." "And did you?" He looked at her, then really looked. The question carried years inside it. "Not exactly," he said softly, "but I think I started waiting." "For what?" He could have said you. He almost did. But instead, he said, "For the rain to stop." Claire smiled a little, that small, knowing curve of her lips that used to undo him. It never really does it? She said. No, he murmured, not here. When she finally stood to leave, he realized he didn't want the moment to end. Are you staying long? He asked. She hesitated. I don't know yet. I'm staying at the inn by the river. Then, maybe we could walk tomorrow. The rain might give us a break. Her eyes softened. And if it doesn't, then we'll walk anyway. She laughed quietly. That same sound that once made the world seem less heavy. All right, Andre, tomorrow. She left, her umbrella opening as she stepped back into the mist. He watched her until she disappeared around the corner. The cafe felt emptier than it had an hour ago, and yet something in him stirred. Something he thought the years had long since buried. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the echo of it. The sound of rain against glass, familiar and endless. That night, Andre sat by his window, sketchbook open for the first time in months. He drew the rain, not the drops, but the way it blurred the world. And somewhere within those blurred lines, he found the shape of her again. When he closed his eyes, he could still hear her voice over the rain. Soft, careful, present, and for the first time in a very long while, he didn't feel alone. Chapter 2. Umbrellas and Old Promises. The rain had lightened by morning, though the clouds still hung low and heavy over Montvini, the kind of sky that promised it wasn't finished yet. Andre stood outside his house, adjusting the collar of his coat and waiting by the gate, umbrella in hand. It had been years since he'd waited for anyone. The thought made him uneasy and quietly alive. He told himself it was just a walk, nothing more, to old friends meeting again after too long. But when he saw Claire walking down the street, her umbrella bright red against the grey day, the years between them collapsed like wet paper. They greeted each other without words at first. She smiled, small and genuine, and he nodded toward the path leading toward the river. Still as stubborn about walking in the rain as you used to be, she teased. He shrugged. It's only water. Besides, it keeps everyone else away. She laughed, a sound softer than the drizzle around them. You always did like the quiet, and you always filled it. She raised an eyebrow at him, playful, and they started walking. The river ran high and slow beside them, brown with silt from the hills. Trees leaned over it, shedding drops from their leaves like sighs. The smell of wet earth and wood smoke filled the air. Do you ever leave Montvini anymore? Claire asked after a while. Not really. I've grown roots here. I remember when you swore you'd never stay in one place too long. He smiled faintly. That was before. Before what? He looked toward the river. Before I learned that some places don't let you go. She nodded. I understand that more than you think. They walked on, passing the old bakery, the schoolyard with its iron fence, the small church that had always smelled faintly of rain even in summer. Claire's voice grew quieter as she said, I heard about your wife. Andre's steps slowed. You did? Yes. I'm sorry, Andre. He nodded, eyes on the cobblestones. It's been 3 years now. Cancer. Quick, merciful, they said. Claire stopped walking. There's no such thing. He met her eyes. She was right. He didn't respond. They walked again, slower now. The rain picked up, soft but steady. After a long silence, Andre asked, And you? Anyone waiting for you back in Paris? She smiled without looking at him. No, there was someone, once, but we were never very good at staying. He studied her face, the small line at the corner of her mouth, the way she avoided his eyes when she said we. I used to wonder what happened, he said quietly. To us. He nodded. She sighed. We were young. You wanted to paint. I wanted to see the world. and maybe we both thought the other would wait, and neither of us did. Claire's voice softened. No, but I did look for your name sometimes. In galleries, in exhibitions. I never found it. He chuckled. That's because I stopped signing it. She looked at him then, surprised. Why? He tapped his chest lightly. Because I couldn't paint without putting too much of this in it, and I didn't want to see it hanging on someone else's wall. For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Then Claire said softly, "You used to tell me that everything worth painting came from love." "I still believe that," he replied. "I just learned it doesn't always come from being loved back." They reached the bridge, the same one that had flooded all those years ago. The stones were slick, the river rushing below. They stopped halfway across and leaned on the railing. Claire looked down at the water. "Do you ever think about how strange it is? We spend half our lives trying to escape where we started, and the other half wishing we could go back." Andre smiled faintly. "Maybe we just get tired of pretending we know where we belong." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "And do you belong here?" He hesitated. "I used to think I stayed because I loved the quiet. Now I think maybe I stayed because I was waiting for the sound of your voice again." The words slipped out before he could stop them. He looked away quickly, embarrassed. Claire didn't answer right away. Then, softly, she said, "You always did say things like that when it rained." He laughed quietly. "And you always pretended not to hear." The rain thickened, falling harder now. She held out her umbrella toward him. "Yours is useless. Come closer." He hesitated, then stepped beneath hers. Their shoulders brushed lightly, then deliberately. For a moment, it felt like the years hadn't happened at all, like they were still 25, standing on that same bridge, laughing at nothing and pretending the world wasn't about to change. The river below carried away the reflection of their umbrella, like a memory being rewritten. They walked back in silence. At the turn toward her inn, she stopped. "Andre." "Yes, thank you for still being here." He wanted to tell her he hadn't known how to be anywhere else, but all he said was, "Always." She smiled, gentle, tired, real, and went inside. Andre stood under the awning a moment longer, watching the rain fall on the cobblestones, the way the lamplight bent through it, the way it made the world both sharper and softer at once. He didn't realize it yet, but something had begun to move in him again, slowly, quietly, like rain working its way into stone. That night, as he painted by the window, he didn't draw the rain this time. He painted two umbrellas, one red, one black, side by side. Chapter 3: The House by the River. The next morning, the air carried the smell of wet grass and chimney smoke. The rain had stopped at last, though clouds still gathered low on the hills, ready to return. Montvini always seemed caught between seasons, between light and grey, as if it, too, couldn't quite move on. Andre was mixing paint when a knock came at the door. When he opened it, Claire stood there with her umbrella closed and a small, uncertain smile. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning. You're early." "I didn't sleep much," she admitted. "I kept thinking about the old house by the river. I thought maybe you'd walk there with me." He hesitated, then nodded. Of course. They followed the narrow path that wound down from the village toward the river bend. The road was lined with poplars, their leaves trembling in the wind. The water was high but calm now, moving with that lazy, heavy rhythm that came after days of rain. The house appeared gradually through the mist, pale stone, ivy climbing the walls, shutters half open as if in mid-breath. It looked both alive and forgotten. Andre remembered it instantly. He'd painted it once, years ago, when they were young, and he'd thought beauty could be captured by light alone. I can't believe it's still standing, he said. Barely, Claire replied with a smile. My aunt left it to me. I used to spend summers here. Do you remember? I remember you sitting by that window, he said, pointing toward the second floor, reading instead of swimming. And you down by the dock, she said, sketching the same tree over and over. He chuckled. I was convinced I'd find something new in it every time. Did you? Yes, he said softly. You. She looked at him then, not with surprise, but with a kind of quiet understanding. The years between them softened in that moment, like the house itself, worn but still standing. They stepped inside. The house smelled of damp wood and dust, but beneath it lingered the faint scent of lavender, the same perfume Claire's aunt had always used. Light poured weakly through the cracked shutters, catching on the dust in the air. The furniture was covered with white sheets, like ghosts sitting patiently in silence. Claire ran her fingers over one of the sheets. Everything feels smaller, she said. It's us who got bigger, Andre replied. Older, maybe, but not wiser. She smiled. Speak for yourself. He grinned. I am. They moved slowly through the rooms, each one holding a memory that crept up uninvited. In the kitchen, she found the old copper kettle, still hanging by the stove. In the parlor, the cracked piano keys they used to play when it rained. In the hallway, the mirror that had once reflected their younger selves, bold, certain, unbroken. Do you remember, she said, the summer storm that flooded this place? We sat upstairs, terrified and laughing. I remember, Andre said. You said, if the river took the house, it could take you too. You wanted to float away somewhere new. I was foolish. No, he said softly. You were free. She turned toward him. And you stayed. I didn't know how to do anything else. Her eyes softened, but she didn't speak. They reached the second floor. The wood creaked under their steps. At the end of the hallway was the small balcony that looked over the river, her favorite spot. Claire stepped outside first. The air was cold, the wind carrying the scent of rain and earth. It's strange, she said, resting her hands on the railing. This place feels exactly the same and completely different. Andre stood beside her. Places don't change, we do. And then we see them differently. She nodded slowly. I think I came back to see if I could find the person I used to be here. Did you? She smiled faintly. Maybe a little, but she feels like someone I used to know, not someone I still am. Andre glanced at her, his voice low. Then maybe you needed someone who remembers her. She looked at him, her eyes glistening slightly. Do you? I remember everything, he said. The words hung between them, fragile and heavy all at once. After a while, Claire opened the balcony door wider and stepped back inside. I want to fix this place, she said, almost to herself. Make it livable again. Maybe stay through the winter. Andre nodded. It'll take work. I don't mind. He hesitated. If you'd like, I can help. I still remember how to repair things. She smiled. You mean you remember how to make a mess and call it art? He laughed. That too. Then, after a pause, but I mean it. Let me help, Claire. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. Tomorrow then. We'll start with the shutters. Tomorrow, he repeated, and for the first time in years. The word didn't sound empty. As they walked back toward the village, the first drops of rain began to fall again. Claire tilted her head toward the sky. Looks like it's starting. Andre smiled. When isn't it? She laughed quietly, and for a moment, it was as if no time had passed at all. That evening, Andre painted again, not from memory this time, but from what he had seen that day. The house by the river, the balcony, the woman standing there, looking toward something only she could see, and for the first time, He signed his name at the bottom. Chapter 4. What the Water Remembers. The next morning, Montvini woke to a strange, gentle quiet. The rain had finally stopped, but the ground still shimmered with dampness. Birds sang cautiously, as though testing if the world was ready for sound again. André arrived at the house by the river just after sunrise. He carried a small toolbox, 2 brushes, and a loaf of bread from the bakery. Half for breakfast, half for company. Claire was already there, sleeves rolled up, a scarf tied around her hair, her hands covered in dust. "You're early," he said. She looked up from a broken shutter. "So are you." He held up the bread. "Bribery." She smiled. "Accepted." They ate on the steps, facing the river. The water was calmer now, sunlight slipping across it like liquid glass. "I forgot how beautiful this place can be," Claire said quietly. "It always was," André replied. "You just had to stay long enough to see it." She tilted her head toward him. "And you? Did you stay too long?" He considered that. Maybe. Or maybe long enough to understand that leaving doesn't fix what hurts. She smiled faintly. "You always did sound like a poet." He shrugged. "Occupational hazard of being lonely, I suppose." Her expression softened. "You don't have to be lonely anymore, André." He didn't answer, but his heart heard it clearly. They began working. André repaired the window frames, while Claire scrubbed the walls. Dust rose like ghosts between them. Occasionally, they'd pause to talk. About the past. About trivial things. About nothing. It was strange how easily they fell into rhythm again, as if the years had been just a long pause in a conversation that never really ended. At one point, Claire found an old photograph, wedged behind a dresser, the 2 of them at the riverside, both smiling, both sunburned and careless. She showed it to him. "Look at us. We thought we knew everything." He smiled. "Maybe we did. We just forgot it later." She stared at the photo for a long time, then tucked it into her coat pocket. By midday, the light shifted, warm, golden, almost forgiving. The river outside gleamed like metal. They stopped for lunch, sitting on the floor where sunlight spilled through the cracks. "Do you ever regret it?" Claire asked suddenly. He looked up. "Regret what?" "Us, the way we ended." "Or didn't end." He exhaled slowly. "I used to, for a long time. But regret is a kind of weight, isn't it? You carry it so long you start to mistake it for your spine." She smiled softly. "And now," he said, "I think maybe we were what we could be, for who we were then." She nodded, eyes glistening. "That's kinder than I expected." He smiled softly. "I've had practice." The afternoon passed in silence, but not an empty one. André painted the repaired shutters, a deep blue, the same color they had been when he was young. Claire cleaned the floors until the smell of dust gave way to the faint scent of soap and wood. When he looked at her, standing in the sunlight, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair undone, he realized how strange it felt. Not the nostalgia of remembering her as she was, but the quiet awe of seeing who she had become. She caught him staring. "What?" "Nothing," he said quickly. Then, after a moment, "You're exactly as I remember." She laughed softly. "That's not possible." "Maybe not," he said, "but it feels true." In the late afternoon, they stood outside to rest. The river murmured below, carrying the faint reflection of clouds. Claire leaned against the railing. "Do you ever think the water remembers?" He frowned slightly. "Remembers what?" "Everything that falls into it. The rain, the leaves, all the things we let go of." He followed her gaze to the water. "Maybe that's why it never stops moving. Maybe it's carrying all of us somewhere. She nodded slowly. When my mother died, I threw one of her scarves into this river. I thought if I let it drift away, I wouldn't have to feel so heavy. And did it work? No, she whispered. But I think it helped me understand that love doesn't leave. It just changes shape. Andre said nothing. The wind moved through the reeds, and for a moment, neither of them could tell if it was the sound of the world or the sound of their memories. As evening came, they closed the shutters, newly painted, freshly alive. The house looked warmer already, more like a place that wanted to be lived in again. Before she left, Claire stood in the doorway, her eyes soft in the fading light. "Thank you, Andre, for helping." "You don't have to thank me," he said. "It feels good to make something whole again." She hesitated. "Not everything can be." "Maybe not," he said, "but we can still try." She smiled, the kind that doesn't reach the lips, but fills the eyes. Tomorrow, then. Tomorrow. After she left, Andre stood alone for a while, listening to the river. He remembered something she'd said years ago. "You can't paint what you don't understand." He wondered if, finally, he was starting to understand. That night, he painted again. Not rain, not the house. This time, he painted the river, broad, endless, silver under moonlight, and in the reflection of the water, two shadows stood side by side, their outlines blurred but unmistakable. Chapter 5. When the rain fell, so did we. By the time the first frost arrived, the house by the river had changed. The shutters stood firm and blue, the windows gleamed, and the rooms had begun to fill with the faint, living smell of coffee and books again. It wasn't perfect, but it was whole, and for both Andre and Claire, that seemed enough. They had fallen into a rhythm, painting, fixing, cooking small meals together. Some days they barely spoke, other days the air between them filled with stories, laughter, and the occasional silence that said far more. It was the kind of companionship that felt like an old song rediscovered, familiar, yet almost unbearably fragile. But beneath it all, something else stirred, a truth neither had yet said out loud. One morning, the first snow began to fall, soft and hesitant. Andre found Claire standing by the balcony, looking out at the river. "It's snowing," she said. "Do you remember the last time we saw snow here?" He smiled faintly. "I do. You tried to catch the flakes on your tongue." She turned toward him, laughing quietly. "And you told me I looked ridiculous." "You did," he said, grinning. "Beautifully ridiculous." The laughter faded, but the warmth lingered. They spent the morning sorting through the attic boxes of letters, photographs, old linens. Dust hung in the light like suspended time. Claire opened a box labeled Eat, 1989. Inside were dozens of letters, his handwriting, hers, and a few never sent. She looked up at him. "You kept these." "I couldn't throw them away." "Why not?" "Because," he said softly, "it was the only way I knew how to keep you." She exhaled slowly, sitting on the floor. "I never stopped thinking about you, Andre, even when I left. Especially when I left." He sat beside her. "Then why didn't you come back?" She looked at her hands. "Because I thought you hated me for leaving." "I did," he said, "for a while. But I hated myself more for not asking you to stay." She smiled softly. "We were children pretending to be adults. We didn't know what we were doing." "No," he agreed, "but I knew I loved you." The silence that followed wasn't painful. It was full, dense with everything unsaid for 30 years. Outside, snow turned to rain, soft, slow, steady. It pattered against the windows like a familiar heartbeat. Claire stood and crossed the room, looking out toward the river. You can't stop it, can you? The rain. It always comes back. He joined her. Maybe it's not meant to stop. Maybe it's meant to remind us of what? That everything we loved still exists somewhere, even if not as we remember it. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to lose it again, Andre. Not this time. You won't. She turned to him, eyes glistening. Promise me. He hesitated. I can promise you this: when the rain falls, I'll think of you. Every time. She smiled through tears. That's not the same. No, he said. It's what we have. They stood close, the rain tracing paths down the window beside them. Andre reached out and took her hand slowly, uncertainly, as though testing whether time would allow it. She didn't pull away. For a long moment, they simply stood there, hand in hand, the sound of rain filling the room. Days passed. The house grew warmer, alive again. But life, as it always does, began to tug at the edges. One morning, Claire received a letter, an offer, from a gallery in Lyon. They wanted to feature her writing, essays on memory and place. When she told Andre, he smiled. You should go. I don't want to leave again. You're not leaving, he said. You're moving forward. That's what rain does, it keeps going. Her eyes searched his. And you. I'll stay. Someone has to keep the shutters blue. She laughed, though it caught in her throat. You'll come visit. Always, he said softly. Whenever it rains. On her last night in Montvini, they walked down to the river. The rain fell gently, turning the world into a blur of reflection and light. Claire looked out across the water. Do you think the river remembers us? I think it remembers everything, he said. Even the things we tried to forget. She squeezed his hand. Then maybe it will remember this too. They stood in silence for a long time, listening to the river's endless murmur, the soft, eternal song of what was and what will never quite fade. When she finally turned to go, she kissed his cheek. Goodbye, Andre. He smiled. No, he whispered. Just until it rains again. Weeks later, the house by the river stood quiet once more, but not empty. On the wall above the fireplace hung a new painting to figures, standing by a river under a shared umbrella, surrounded by falling rain. Below it, signed for the first time in decades, were the words, Andre Valois, and beneath his name, written faintly in pencil, almost hidden, for Claire. When the rain fell, so did we.